There we are. We are live. Yay.
Hey, everyone.
What's going on, YouTube world and Facebook land? It's Adam Henkel here with the Makers Mob. I'm here with Jon Peters, and we are excited to be talking about wood finishing, wood prep, and that today. If you can hear us, fine. Let us know in the chat. Jon, why don't you say hello? Test the audio here. What do you have going on lately, Jon? Do you give us a little update while we're waiting for people to jump on here?
Just kind of usual summer, getting ready to spend some family time and getting some projects. I'm doing more of a simple project for Makers Mob coming up in August, so I'm working on some designs for that.
Nice.
And I'm getting to work on a sofa table, which I'll be starting in about 2 weeks. So just the usual kind of woodworking, going about life type thing.
Yeah. Are you planning on taking any time with the family this summer?
Yeah, we're going to do a couple things. We'll probably go to Vermont for a little bit. We like to do that. And of course, I'm at the Jersey Shore here, so that's kind of almost a weekly thing. We go to the beach. Yeah.
Did you know that this is completely off topic, but did I ever tell you that I lived in Pennsylvania for a year? I'm from Canada, but I actually graduated in right by Washington Crossing, near it would be by Trenton, New Jersey.
Okay,
across the river. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. So
that's not too far. It's about an hour and 20, I think, from me.
Okay, yeah, I was in Yardley, Pennsylvania. So I was close to you.
Did you work your way out to the coast at all, or no?
I went there a couple times. I mean, I graduated, so of course our grad class did some trips out to the coast, and I kind of went all over the place when I was there. I was only there a year, but
nice.
Yeah, I'm sure people aren't really here to listen about my history though, so we'll move on from that.
All right.
If you guys are here, you may be watching this on Jon's YouTube channel, you may be watching it on the Makers Mob YouTube channel, and you may be watching it on the Makers Mob Facebook group. Wherever you're at, thank you for joining us. My name's Adam Henkel. I'm with the Makers Mob. That's Jon Peters. And before we get into talking about wood prep and wood finishing, we're going to just give you a couple updates on what's going on inside the Makers Mob, some cool stuff happening very soon. Let's get right into that. Cue the slide. We have our announcements. We've got the Kamiko Challenge with Neil Paskin tomorrow. So if you're a member of the Makers Mob, make sure you look out for that. You'll be getting an email tomorrow to make sure that you are on the notification list for the challenge. That's going to be released tomorrow afternoon, evening for the first week. That's going to be awesome. So make sure you guys check that out. Inside the Makers Mob, some of the most recent projects are the Samurai wall-mounted bookshelf. Jon's modern dresser is in there, as well as John Heise's woodworker's workbench. We do have a couple more projects that are in there that are even more recent than that. There's always lives available. The replays are available on the lives tab on the site. I did a live a couple weeks ago with Jimmy Dresta. Week or two before that with the Third Coast Craftsman, and also with Liam Hoffman and the Samurai Carpenter. So that is, there we go. This is another one, the Woodworker's Toolbox that Jon just released. There's tutorials and plans for that inside the Makers Mob as well. So that was released, I believe, last week. So that's what's going on inside the Makers Mob. If you guys aren't a part of the Makers Mob, there's a link in the description wherever you're watching where you can join. It's a monthly membership, and we've got lives happening all the time inside the Makers Mob. We've got projects and plans and tutorials. We've got the awesome community, monthly prizes, all that stuff. So make sure you check it out. If you're not a member, we'd love to have you a part of the community. That is it for the announcements. We're going to get right into this, Jon.
All right.
So talking wood prep and wood finishing. Actually, before we get started, if you guys have questions, save it to the end. Don't just throw it in the chat now because we might miss it. So wait maybe 20 minutes or so, and then we'll start taking questions that Jon will be able to answer. So, Jon, when you're doing a project, wood prep is probably the most important. I mean, from my experience, it's one of the most important things. Can make or break a project based on like how the finish turns out. So let's start at the beginning of your wood prep. I want to know, based on, let's talk about the differences maybe in wood prep for, a fine piece of furniture, something that's stained, something that's painted, maybe an exterior project. So let's kind of touch on the different things. So maybe let's start with, like, if you're doing a fine piece of furniture that's stained, let's say, what would be your process?
I'm going to start with painted furniture because that's relatively quick.
Yeah.
So exterior painted projects, standing with 80, 150, that's pretty much good enough. For the most part, I'm using a latex primer and then a latex paint. For the most part, that's what I'm using. Benjamin Moore, latex primer, and latex paint. And
do you spray that, or do you roll it or brush it?
Mostly I brush it.
Okay.
And I'm talking about smaller projects like lampposts, outdoor furniture, things like that. I did spray recently some planters, and I used Benjamin Moore Advanced for the finish coat. And if you use Benjamin Moore Advanced High Gloss, you can use that for exterior. So a few questions when I did the project is I didn't realize you could use Advanced outside. Only the high gloss you can use for exterior.
Okay.
So basically for me with exterior projects, the fill I'm using is Ready Patch. I don't have the can with me right now, but that's an oil-based filler.
Yeah.
It dries relatively quickly, sands pretty easily, and works pretty good. For me, it's time tested.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing for me. That's the golden rule: is what do I have a history with, and what hasn't blown up in my face and costed me more time.
Yeah.
So that's for the exterior projects. For interior projects, maybe sanding down to 120, perhaps 150. I might use a lighter weight sandpaper, not to round the corners over, but just to break the edge.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a real beginner's mistake, to round corners over to the point of where they start to look clumsy instead of crisp.
So would you say, like, I mean, in my past as cabinet making, we always would do like a 1/8 or even a 1/16 round over bit, like on a laminate trimmer.
Round over like in a router bit, sure.
Yeah.
That's a look.
Yeah.
If you're going to use a round over bit in a tabletop, or that's part of the design. But if you want a crisp edge that's not sharp, then I don't use a machine on that. So generally I'll hit that, I always rip the sandpaper into 4 pieces out of 1 sheet, and you can see that fits into your hand nicely like that. And you just sort of soften those corners up a little bit. I'm not going to hit the edge of anything with an orbital sander or a palm sander for the most part, because I don't want to lose control. I want that crisp edge. And then again, I'll go right in with a latex primer. I might spray it. I might roll. Depending on how big the project is, spray, roll, brush. That's going to raise the grain. So after I sand, I'll prime it. And when that primer hits the wood, it raises the grain, and it also highlights any imperfection and makes them easier to see, because for the most part, I'm using a white primer. So any nail holes that actually I haven't filled the nail holes yet. Any little thing that I may have missed is going to be magnified.
Yeah.
And then for filling nail holes and small imperfections in a piece of painted furniture, I use joint compound. I've been using it for more than 25 years now. And it's just so easy to use. It's readily available. It sands easy. So that primer goes on there. Then the fill goes on there. And then I sand the primer and the wood fill at the same time.
Okay. So and do you do that by hand, or do you use a machine to do that?
For the most part, I'm doing it by hand. If I have large flat surfaces, I might use a palm sander or a random orbit sander.
Okay.
The nice thing about using a machine is if you've got some dust collection on there, then you can, you don't have such a dusty mess.
Are you worried about flashing of that compound? Like, do you prime again afterwards, or do you just?
I do actually, yeah. Because if you think about it, what's going to happen is you've got a coat of primer on the wood, but now you've got this open joint compound that if you put a finished coat of paint on there, it's just going to absorb into that joint compound, and you're going to see everything because it's going to appear flat next to maybe your semi-gloss finish. So then after I sand the primer and the fill, it gets another coat of primer, sand it again, and now it's ready for some finish. And that's going to be the best application is if you spray it. And I think that spraying Benjamin Moore Advance, you can get a really nice finish. And I need to work on that more. I haven't sprayed a lot of paint. I spray it from time to time, but too much time goes between spraying that I never build up a good rhythm where I feel really confident, like I know what I'm doing. Usually when I start spraying, it might be a day or two of like re-going to school and through trial and error and making a few mistakes and then realizing, oh yeah, I need to add a little water to this mix or something like that if I'm using a waterborne finish.
Gotcha. Do you have a spray area set up?
I do. So I've got this barn here, which is 15.5 feet by 31 feet. And then I've got a little shed that was my lawnmower shed, which is about 9.5 feet by 31 feet.
Okay.
And I just put a wall in that to put all my lawn equipment in like a 10-foot area now. So now I have a designated area in the barn that's about 9.5 by 20 feet for some storage, but also sanding, getting things out of here, and finishing. Nice. And so I've got a fan on the wall with filters on it. So if I'm spraying paint, I don't have all that overspray going on the side of the building.
Yeah.
And that works great.
Yeah. And that's the thing with spraying paint is that your overspray is very noticeable, whereas spraying clears is not as noticeable. It's definitely there, but
spraying clear is probably the easiest thing you can do. Spray clear lacquer.
Yeah. I
mean, it's pretty hard to screw that one up after you've done it a couple of times. Once you've done it a couple of times, it's just so, and it's funny. I worked for a cabinet maker by the name of Bob Walczak at the Woodworker when I was a kid. That's how I learned all this stuff. And when he got out of the business at 70 years old, about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I interviewed him and I asked him, "What's your finish of choice?" He said, "Lacquer. It's just easy." So he's generally spraying a pre-catalyst lacquer. So it's a tough enough finish. I mean, I'm sure he used conversion varnish. I've never used a conversion varnish, but his finish of choice for the majority of his furniture was lacquer, and for painted furniture is Benjamin Moore Advance.
Okay. My history is I've done a lot of spraying with pre-catalyzed and post-catalyzed lacquers, as well as whenever in the cabinet shop days, we did a lot of colored lacquer, which was essentially like it was catalyzed paint that we would add catalyst to and thin it out and that.
What is post-catalyst lacquer?
So it's essentially the lacquer that hasn't been catalyzed yet, so the shelf life is a lot longer. And you purchase the catalyst separately, and it actually is they say in the industry it's a harder, stronger, more durable finish, because that catalyst, when you're mixing your lacquer, you thin it, you add the catalyst to the lacquer, and then it apparently goes as a harder finish than the pre-catalyzed lacquer. Because
so you can't spray post-catalyst lacquer without adding the catalyst?
No, it won't kick off.
It won't. Okay.
Yeah. So that's that would be like a commercial grade lacquer that I can only get it from a wholesaler here that's specific for cabinetry and woodworking here in Victoria. Okay. I'm sure if you looked for it, you could find it, but the company that I use for that is Iroko Distributors, and it's ML Campbell is the product that I've used for that. So Someone is asked, or someone said here that they stayed up late for this and they're very excited.
Oh, great.
There you go. Cathal, is that how you pronounce that? Good to have you here with us. Let's move on to, so that's painted. Let's move on to if you're going to stain and do a clear coat, or if it's just a clear coat project, what you would do for that.
I'll briefly talk about stain because I don't use it all that often.
Okay.
If I do use a stain, I'm generally using a walnut stain.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just buying Minwax walnut stain, and I might be using it on Sapele just to take a little bit of the red out.
Mm-hmm.
Because Sapele is sort of like today's mahogany. That's what they're selling it as.
Yeah.
And that red look is really nice, but if you want to sort of tone it down a little bit and have some, a little bit warmer, then I'll use an oil-based Minwax. And if you're using an oil-based stain on the wood, then of course you're going to use a solvent-based spray. And I'm generally using a lacquer. Mm-hmm. So I don't stain too many things. Sometimes picture frames and things like that, or Sapele tops. And again, it's just it's like, I think it's American walnut from Minwax.
Yeah,
that's the thing. I try to keep things pretty simple, because if you start dabbling in all kinds of different finishes, you can have a whole room just full of paint cans and finishing cans.
Yeah.
And I know that because I've done it, and I'm trying to be sort of streamlined and only use what I know that works. And I'm not getting into a science experiment at the end of a project when I'm just hoping to finish it and get it out the door.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it does turn into that, right? You start.
Like sometimes the finish blows up on you, and that doesn't happen anymore because I've had enough blow up on me to know what not to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, that can happen for sure. So I try to stick with just your basic finishes. I have some samples over here. I could start picking at them if you want, and I'll.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So before I talk about the finish, I'll talk about the surface prep. And again, I'm going to sand all the flat surfaces with probably starting with 80 on the orbital if I need to, and then from 80 going to 120 to 150, and then going no higher than 220. I know a lot of guys seem to go a lot higher than that. I've never found it to be needed.
I in my past, I mean, that's the max that I typically would go to. If you go finer than that, it almost closes the grains, and it's a very weak, like it doesn't suck in as much.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So 150, and I mean, there's different weights of sandpaper. So if you're using a heavyweight sandpaper, it's going to, so when I say different weights, the paper, I think there's A, B, and C weights. So I think the A weight is a much softer paper, and you can use that sort of when you're sanding those delicate edges when you don't want to round them over. Mm-hmm. But I'm using the orbital, and then I'm using the palm sander for the finish sanding. Mm-hmm. Basically cutting any edges. One thing that I do, and it might be a little controversial, is I remove any wood glue squeeze out with a wet rag.
Yeah. And
for the tight spots, I use a wet paintbrush.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I've heard a couple of guys who really know what they're talking about swearing that you can't do that because there's somehow going to be glue in the grain. But I've never had that problem. I've just worked hard to make sure that there's no glue in there. There's no glue residue, because nobody wants to hit glue when they're staining or finishing something.
Yeah.
So what that's going to do, though, it is going to raise the grain. So then you'll hit that again with some 150, and you'll just make sure everything is good and sanded before you go to apply your finish. And then so this first finish here is Waterlox, which is it's a tongue oil, and it's like a wipe-on varnish. It has dryers in it. The way I apply this finish, because you have to apply several coats to let it build. I think they say 24 hours between coats. I generally will cheat, and I'll get a coat on very early in the morning at like 6 in the morning. And then when I leave the shop at the end of the day, I'll put another coat on. Mm-hmm. And you also do not need to sand in between coats. But because you're not sanding in between coats, you're going to end up with a very rough finish.
Yeah.
So what I end up doing is getting 3 or 4 coats on in that same way I just explained. And starting around the 3rd or 4th coat, I start to sand in between coats.
If you didn't sand with the sheen, because I know if you don't sand in between coats of some finishes, the sheen actually gets glossier and glossier. Does that happen with that at all, or?
It might, but I just noticed that it just gets rough. It becomes rougher to touch.
Yeah.
So, and I'll get to this in a minute. I think one of the most important things about furniture is how it feels, right? So I'm going for that. The idea is with furniture is you want somebody to notice it, and because they notice it, come in for a closer look, and if they do that, then they're going to touch it.
Yeah.
And you want that feel. You want it to feel good, nice and smooth. So with Waterlox, anywhere between 4 and 6 coats. If I'm building a table, I might put 4 coats on the base and 6 or 7 coats on the top. The nice thing about this finish is a year from now, you can simply go and lightly sand it with 320 sandpaper and I use an old t-shirt, put another coat on. And so let's just say that this has gotten some little scratches or whatever, just wear and tear. Not so much watermarks, but just regular wear and tear. It'll kind of smooth those out. So that's something that, every couple of years, if I have a piece of furniture in my house somewhere, I might just kind of spruce it up one weekend. Give it a light sanding, clean it, give it a light sanding, put another coat of Waterlox on it, maybe 2, and it's good for another 10 years.
I have a question just popped into my brain here as you were talking about the difference, putting 4 coats on the base and 6 to 8 or whatever on the top. When you're finishing, let's say, a countertop, how important is it to you to make sure that it's finished and sealed all sides? And do you do even coats or do you do more on the top? And how do you do that?
So I finish every side, right? So there's no moisture getting in anywhere. So the table legs, the bottom of the table legs are sealed. So there's no moisture getting up through the end grain. The table top, if I'm doing a tabletop, I might put 4 coats on the bottom, but that's it. After that, I'm just going to focus on the top. And with this Waterlox application, you're basically just using a rag that you've made into a ball, and you'll put the material down, then go in the direction of the grain, and then you might just go right around the edge, and you're not making a mess. It's not like rolling underneath. You wouldn't want to have drips of finish rolling under the table. So, and then once that's done, I have another thing that I always use, which is something called Wool Lube by Mohawk Finishing Products. And that's essentially like a soapy paste that you put on 4-0 steel wool. And that's going to smooth that finish out, even it out a little bit, take away any of the sheen and any little imperfections or nibs or whatever that you might get in there. It's going to make those go away. And so you might, run that steel wool around the side and a little bit around the bottom of the table. It's always about the customer's experience, right? So when they come up to that table, they're going to touch that table. They might run their hand down it. And you just I like that idea. The customer realizes wow, this is nice. This is you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a good thing.
We used to, the trick we used to do in the cabinet days is if I ever felt any nibs or anything on the finish, I'd actually just take a just blank piece of paper and I would rub that on that, and it wouldn't affect the sheen, but it's probably a 4,000 grit paper, right? So it would just kind of do just to make sure, and that if they did touch that, if it was a high traffic area, make sure that was good.
Yeah, because it's amazing how sensitive your hands are. And if somebody's paying the big bucks for something, they want it to look good and feel good and work on every level.
Yeah. Someone's asking to clarify, it's Waterlox that you're talking about?
Yeah, I have the can right here. So this is Waterlox original. Whoops, got to figure this one out. And as you can see, they've been around since 1910. And yeah, I've been using this at least 25 years, maybe 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit more of a time commitment. So, you know, sometimes if you're building something out of a special wood, you think, oh, I just want to put that oil finish on there just to sort of see it pop. And you might not be in as much of a rush. But I mean, I'm telling you, like, here's Waterlox and this is lacquer. And they're both pretty good, I think.
Yeah. The nice thing, I mean, when you said you interviewed your former boss there, and he said he loved the lacquer. The lacquer cures faster, right?
Sure.
Right. So that's a bonus if you're trying to get something out of the shop.
Yeah,
But,
because it cures faster, you don't have to worry about dust getting on it as much. I mean, you can spray lacquer and start making dust in the shop in half an hour.
Yeah. With the Waterlox, does it take a while to kick off? I guess it's not kicking off. It's just slowly drying, right?
It's just slowly drying. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just slowly drying. It's that finish is kind of a labor of love. You know what I mean? You're kind of into the piece. You're trying to do things that are more time sense, not like historically important or whatever.
Yeah.
Where, you know what I mean? Like, not archival. Archival's not the word, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. You're just relaxing with it. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I do that. Like, I made that table, the lily table that for my clients last year, and that's Waterlox because I just thought it would look really good on that finish.
Yeah.
And the couple is, you know, their kids are older, and it's like Waterlox is a good finish, but you know, it's like any finish. You got to take care of it. It's not polyurethane on your floor.
Yeah.
You know? And so just because I mentioned that, I do want to say I've got 4 kids. They're all a little bit older now, except for my daughter's only 12. But needless to say, they don't care about my furniture. At least they didn't then. And so they're beating the heck out of everything. So when I made my kitchen table, it's a cherry top. I finished it with, I believe it's Minwax oil-based polyurethane for your floor. Because my feeling was it's going to get beat up. It's going to take a beating. And it's a nice looking finish, actually. It's, you know, if you put the finish down right, you can get a good finish with polyurethane. And one trick to that is you can put your can of polyurethane in the refrigerator before you use it, and it will level out a little bit more.
Okay.
Because some old timer painter told me that he used to keep his polyurethane in a beer cooler when he would put it down.
Huh.
Yeah,
I've never heard that. I'd like to try that.
Yeah, it makes sense. I've done it, and it seems to work. So, but my kitchen table is cherry, and it's pretty much bulletproof.
Huh.
You could leave a glass of water on that for a day, and nothing's going to happen. I mean, think about it. It's what's on your floor in your house.
Yeah, my kids have found a way to scratch the floor even after I refinished it. So, I mean,
yeah, they pick up on things for sure.
Yeah. Before we get to some Q&A, if you're watching, you have a question for Jon, get those ready to put them in the chat. Jon, do you have any other samples or finishes you want?
Yeah, so I'll go through them. I can go quicker. You can rush me along, whatever. So we just talked about Waterlox. This one is just lacquer, and the lacquer that I use, this isn't a pre-catalyst lacquer. This is, well, at least it doesn't say it on the can. The can is Finisher's Choice.
Okay.
By Mohawk Finishing Products.
Yeah.
And this is very easy to use. You don't have to thin this out at all.
Oh, wow.
It's a good thing because you don't have to thin it, but it's a bad thing because you're actually getting less material.
Yeah.
Right? So, but I generally do not thin this at all. I'm trying to figure out this camera. I will put that in the gun and go ahead and spray it. And I'm usually getting 2 to 3 coats on in one day. Mm-hmm. And the sprayer that I'm using is the Fuji HVLP here. I've now got the Q5 turbine, which is so quiet compared to what I used to have. And I think a big fear that people have as far as spraying is cleaning the gun, right? Maybe not a fear, but something they don't want to deal with. So I have two guns. One is for paint projects. Yeah. And then I have this gun that I only use clear finishes in. So when I'm spraying lacquer, I'll finish up. I'll pour the contents of a cup back into the can. I'll take a rag, clean out whatever's in there, kind of give the this part here a little bit of a shake to get anything off there. Then a little lacquer thinner goes in there, and this part of the cup tip comes off, and I'll spray that right into a lacquer thinner container that's labeled used lacquer thinner.
Nice.
And that's about it. Then I'll basically pour whatever else I don't use out, wipe out the cup, shoot some air through it. It's good to go next time.
Yeah, it's not that. I mean, that's what we used to do the same thing. I mean, it's really not that much to clean it out.
It really isn't. I mean, I know guys will break down an entire gun, but again, it's not that I want to live in a throwaway society, but this gun isn't that expensive at the end of the day. And I'll be able to, with this system that I just explained, I fully expect to get at least 3 years out of this gun using clear finishes.
Yeah.
And I will also use waterborne finishes in that gun. Yeah. And of course, when I do that, then I'm spraying water through the gun. But then after spraying water through the gun, I'll spray a little lacquer thinner through the gun just for good measure.
Yeah.
The reason why I don't want to spray paint through that gun is if I'm spraying paint through this gun, and now I'm going to go finish a piece of walnut furniture, and now I've got lacquer in the gun. Well, that lacquer is going to loosen up a piece of paint, and I'm going to end up with a white piece of paint on this piece of walnut.
Yeah.
So 2 guns, totally worth it. So that covers lacquer. Then we'll get into waterborne lacquer. Now I want you to see the difference here. Right? So this one here, this one here is primed with shellac. So shellac and then waterborne lacquer. This one here is just waterborne lacquer. Look at how lifeless this one is.
It's right? Big difference.
Yeah. So that's like, in my book, a total no-no. Don't spray waterborne lacquer on any kind of a dark wood like your cherry, your walnut, your sapele. It's going to take the life right out of it. Unless you prime it first with shellac. The shellac will bring the life in the wood. It'll seal it. And then you can use a waterborne lacquer. So in this case, this is just your regular bullseye shellac right here. Right. The only thing with shellac is you got to be careful because it does have a shelf life.
Yeah.
Some people make their own shellac. Usually I do. And then the lacquer is, again, a Mohawk pre-catalyst waterborne lacquer. It's a good, strong finish. And again, it's a nice, easy finish to use. You can build those coats up, sanding in between coats with 320 sandpaper. And I guess that's it. Those are my 4 samples. That's
your go-to.
That's my go-to. And then the last thing I'll say is, if I'm going to build like cabinets, like kitchen cabinets or something, all of the inside I'm going to finish. It's generally going to be birch plywood.
Yeah. I'm
going to use waterborne pre-catalyst lacquer from Mohawk, just because I'm used to it.
Yeah.
But if you're spraying something like birch, it's actually nicer to use a waterborne finish, in my view, than a solvent base, because a solvent base is going to make it look yellow, and the waterborne is going to keep it looking nice and fresh and clean.
Gotcha. Nice. I actually, most of any cabinetry that I've done in the past, I buy like a pre-finished birch, and that would probably have a lacquer on it, I would guess. That's not a waterborne, because it's usually quite yellow.
Yeah. If you get like a nice piece of birch plywood and roll or spray some waterborne lacquer on it, it's going to look almost identical to what it looks like when you bring it in. It doesn't yellow.
Yeah, which is quite light and white.
Yeah, and it just kind of has like a nice, fresh, clean look. So when you open up those cabinet doors, everything looks pretty nice, I think.
Nice. Love it. We've got a bunch of questions popping in. Before we get into the questions in the chat, for those of you who were here at the beginning, I gave a little spiel about the Makers Mob, which is I'm from the Makers Mob. We do have a member of the Makers Mob standing by to join us here just to ask a question live. It's kind of one of the highlights that you can have for being a member to join us on these lives. So Kevin, I'm going to pull Kevin on here to ask you a question, John. Here we go. There's Kevin.
Hey, how are you, Kevin?
Kevin, your audio looks like it's muted.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, all good. Hey, you got your shirt on.
Yeah, got the shirt on.
Nice.
Yep.
Got the Makers Mob shirt. Kevin, how you doing? What is your
Doing
question?
pretty good.
What is your question
So
for John
I
here?
I wanted to say that I love seeing that you use the sapele from your mom's table in that outdoor build that you did there. That's fantastic. I was watching the video and saw you pull out that sapele and thought, wonder if that's from her table. And then you mentioned that it was. It was great. So a bit of feedback for Walter. Looks like he flipped the board when he was doing the and that's why it was raised, because it was different face that he was using, different reference face and that. So let him know that. But all in all, seems to be doing a fantastic job, and I like the format of the new videos. They're really cool.
Oh, thank you.
And whatnot. So do you ever use blotch prevention? And if so, how do you decide when? And okay, well, that's easy then. Yeah.
So I just saw somebody do a video on blotch prevention, but I just haven't. I don't know much about it, so I can't really speak to that. But since you brought, and I'll talk about that. But since you brought up that table, I just realized I forgot another finish, and a lot of people were asking about this finish. And this is this is a Teak Sealer, and the reason why I ended up using this, which is more like a penetrating oil, is because every time I've sealed an outdoor piece of furniture, like my outdoor kitchen countertop, small tables, whatever, with a marine varnish of any manufacturer, ultimately it fails. And when it fails, it requires a lot of work, because generally there's a chip in the finish or something, moisture gets in there, the wood expands, the finish doesn't, and it just starts to fail. So the reason why on this table, and I'll keep everybody posted, as the months go by, and along with the table that's on my mom's deck, I wanted to use this because the feeling was that I could reapply the finish, and it's probably going to be vulnerable to stains, like if a bird takes a crap on that table, it might stain it. Or
especially if you don't see it for weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. So, or if somebody picks up a piece of metal and puts it on the table and the metal rusts. So the finish isn't going to be as good there, but I think I'm sort of coming to the realization, if it's going to be a table or piece of furniture that lives outside, you're just going to have to put up with some things.
So back to the blotch prevention that Kevin was asking. I mean, if you were staining, which you don't do often, but do you do a pre-stain, like a conditioner at all on that, or?
Now, so you probably have more experience with this, Adam, so you might be able to speak to it better than I can. Like, I would imagine if you're staining a light wood, like a maple or something, is where this blotch prevention is going to come into play. Yeah,
in my experience, it is like sometimes with like a edge grain fir or maple, birch, anything like pine. I would use it. Alder sometimes can be blotchy if you're doing a project of, I don't know if you've ever used alder.
I haven't.
No, we have that out here where I am, so we've used that. It's like they call it the poor man's cherry. It looks similar to cherry, but it blotches quite a bit when you stain it. and it's kind of lifeless as well as a wood. But yeah, I mean, it's really, I only use that when I'm using those types of woods and putting an actual stain on there. If it's a clear coat, I don't typically do it myself, like a conditioner.
How about you, Kevin? Do you have any experience with it?
Well, I haven't used any, but I've made a few tools on my own. And one of the couple of the first ones that I made were from reclaimed fir that was probably 100 years old. So it was hard as rock, but the end grain on it was super dark in comparison to the rest of the side or face grain. And so I've, a little bit of research, I've found that, the blotch prevention will help with that and around the knots in those kinds of woods, like Adam was saying with the pine and whatnot. So I was just wondering if you had any experience in that with it, and if you had any project or any product that you recommended and whatnot. So
yeah,
well, I guess he doesn't.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I noticed that you started using the Thixio for your outdoor projects, your mom's table, and now your outdoor table. And you touched on this a little bit when you were talking to Adam earlier, but do you find that it's more or less forgiving with regards to your finishing and the squeeze out that comes from it? Like you talked about how you try and keep that to be a minimum with words, and haven't really experienced anything with regards to glue up affecting the grain in that finishing. But have you had anything with the Thixio product?
It's actually been really great. So I used to do a lot of things with epoxy going maybe back 20 years, more towards like artwork type of projects. Mm-hmm. So I was familiar with using epoxy and putting, what is that stuff called that thickens epoxy? It's like a powder. Anyway, I was familiar with using thickened epoxy for projects. And so when I was looking at the Total Boats Thixo, I thought that made sense for what I want to do. Because if you think about putting a table together and you're trying to pour epoxy, it's going to be running everywhere.
Yeah.
And the Thixo, with the way it goes out, just like a caulking gun, works really good. And even when you flip the table over, it doesn't even drip on the table. It just sort of makes little, little like just hanging down pieces that don't fall all the way. So it's easier to clean up. And the first time I used it, I didn't know what kind of working time I had. So I was really kind of rushing along. But now I realize you have at least probably 2 or 3 hours of working time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's nice. So if you're thinking about a glue up, that's a potential stressful glue up where you're going to be fighting it with a tight bond 2 or 3.
Yeah.
You might want to think about the Thixio. And also, I'm not getting any kind of glue lines because it's so thin when it gets clamped together.
Nice.
So yeah, I kind of shy away from using things like that, epoxies and stuff, just because the idea of something being water-based for cleanup is just kind of nice. But I'll probably use that Thixo a lot more in the future, especially since I've always felt that one of the difficult things about making any kind of an outdoor table, whether it's small or large, is how do you make a solid top? Because you're going to be dealing with expansion and contraction and what's the best glue to use. And I think that I'm going to be making a project for Maker's Mob in August, and I'll probably use the Thixo again with the dominoes. Mm-hmm. And I think it'll be a good joint. And more than likely, I'll probably use this Total Boat Sealer again, with the idea that maybe these pieces of furniture come inside end of October.
Okay,
awesome.
So one last question. So one of my next projects is going to be some outdoor planters. I'm planning on doing shoshugiban for the finish. And I've found lots of videos on how to do the burning and all that kind of stuff, but not a lot that talks about how to finish it after you've done that burning. I was thinking raw linseed oil because I'm going to be doing vegetable planters versus plants and whatnot. But do you have any suggestions, thoughts?
Definitely do a couple of samples. Right?
Okay.
Because it's an exterior project. An interior project, you can use anything, but on an exterior project, I think the linseed oil is a good choice. Maybe Ipe oil or this stuff here, this Teak Sealer, which has kind of an orange color. You got to decide whether or not you like that color. Of course, if you're going to be burning the wood, you're probably going to be able to get it really nice and dark anyway. But what I would do is make a couple of samples, and that way you don't have any bad surprises at the end of your project.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Kevin, for joining us. Awesome to have you. Kevin's been on a couple
Thanks
of these
for having
lives.
me.
He's always jumping, one of the first guys to jump on it when I do the announcement in the Makers Mob for people to join us. So thanks, Kevin, again for joining us. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks.
Great talking with you, Kevin.
Always a pleasure.
You too.
We'll see you, Kevin. There we go. That's Kevin. He's been on, I think, 2 or 3
Cool.
of the
Good
lives
questions.
with the Makers. Yeah, it's great. So if you're wondering where Kevin came from, he's a member of the Makers Mob. I put a post in our community asking if anyone wants to join, and he jumped on that. So we got a couple questions. Let's fire through these. Let's try and maybe get through these in about 5 minutes or so, and then wrap things up. So we've got. Someone was asking, how long did you leave in the fridge? Did you leave it? I think that was back to the
Put it
finish.
in there for a couple hours so it can get nice and cold.
Another question here. After filling holes on primed wood, do you add primer just to that filled area or the entire piece?
Mostly the entire piece, because they're just generally, for painted projects, we're talking about small little pinholes or nail holes.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've primed it, you filled it, and then you prime again the whole piece, or just spot prime?
Yeah, prime the whole piece.
Okay. This is not a finishing question, but this will be a quick answer. Dominoes versus biscuit versus loose tenon. Not a tenant, a tenon.
I just started using the domino, and the possibilities now that I'm using it just seem so endless. So I'm just going to say dominoes because I want to play with that thing a lot.
Yeah. We've got Halloween guy asks, I'm making a hope chest. Would you breadboard the ends of the lid? Do you have a suggestion for that?
I would say that personally, I would never breadboard any edge. I know that people do that. It doesn't make any sense to me because the top is going to expand differently than the edge. And if you're fine with that top sticking out 1/8 of an inch or being sucked in 1/8 of an inch, that's fine. But aesthetically, I've never liked that.
Yeah, there you go. Quick, easy answer. Is sanded birch gonna turn yellow? Sanded birch.
Sanded, no. If you use a waterborne finish, it's going to stay kind of like it looks when you get it. If you use a solvent-based finish like an oil finish or a lacquer, you're going to get that yellow look.
I know like most wood will change in sunlight or when it's exposed. Sure. Do you know if birch yellows? I know maple does, fir goes dark, cherry goes dark.
I don't know. I don't know what birch does. I don't think it does. And then one thing, I think this is a good piece of knowledge maybe, is if I'm going to build anything that's going to get southern exposure, I use white oak. I find that to be the most stable wood in color of anything I've ever used. I've built things for people who have these pieces of furniture in a window. They're made out of white oak, and they look great now. If that was walnut, it'd be so bleached out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I mean, we won't get into what wood properties do in sunlight, but yeah, it definitely. White oak is my favorite wood to work with. Period.
It's a great wood.
Yeah. Any advice on finishing plywood? Do you treat that differently or same?
Pretty much treat it the same. Whatever the piece of furniture is, like I said, if you're doing, birch plywood on the inside of cabinets, a waterborne finish is great if you're clear coating. But if you're generally, if it's on like a piece of furniture, I'm usually veneered over it or something. I've never had like a piece of furniture that I've built that's a natural finish that is birch.
I would say if you're finishing and prepping a veneered project in general, don't sand too aggressively at the edges.
For sure.
But yeah, I mean, the finish should be pretty straightforward once you're done your prep. This is fiberglass. I think they're talking when you're talking about the thick so.
No, so no, it's not fiberglass. It's shit. I forget the name of that stuff. Silica. Silica. That's what it is. Sometimes a word I just can't think of it. You know, it drives me a little nuts. But yeah, silica is the word.
Do you use the Total Boat epoxy as well? If so, what's your thoughts?
I haven't used it yet, but Total Boat, I've never been sponsored by Total Boat. Excuse me. But they did send me some finishes and some samples, and they sent me some epoxy. I have more experience. Sorry.
I know it's a tough topic. It's very sensitive, close to your heart, and it gets you emotional. It's okay.
I have more. I'm getting a glass of water. I have more experience with West System epoxy.
Okay, yeah, that's the stuff that I have here in the shop too.
I've heard nothing but great things about Total Boat, though. So
me too. Seems like a lot of guys are using it.
Jesse use it.
Yeah, he actually put it on the bottom of his boat.
Yep.
What about milk paint or dyes? Those are.
I used to. Geez. I used to use milk paint a lot when I worked at that cabinet shop back in the late 80s. And I like that. What we used to do is we would paint the projects with the milk paint, lightly sand them, and then go over them with a wax.
Okay.
Kind of like very shaker inspired pieces of furniture.
Yeah.
I like the feel and look of that furniture. It's definitely, it's not modern, but shaker furniture is so minimal that it's almost modern.
Doug asks, do you use grain filler?
I've never used it.
Me neither.
People have talked about it. I've never used it.
Let's see here. Sorry, I'm just reaming through here. Here we go. You seem to use sapele a lot. Does it compare to mahogany?
I've only used mahogany a handful of times because it's not as available as sapele. And sapele's a nice wood. I don't have a lot of experience with mahogany, so it's also very easy when you're out to lumberyard to sort of go through the boards because there's so much of it there, and I'm usually buying S4S wood so I can see the grain and I can sort of spend some time there and match everything up, where I just don't have that opportunity with mahogany.
Yeah. I've got about 3 more questions here. John, how do you handle getting material to your barn given its location on your property? Have you has this person done like a satellite view on Google of your property or something?
Well, you follow me on Instagram.
Oh, okay.
You probably saw the barn is maybe 150 feet away from the house. So sometimes if the ground is frozen, I'll drive my truck out to the barn, or if the ground is dry, I'll drive my truck out to the barn. But I also have a little 4-wheeler, a little 250 4-wheeler with a work trailer, and I use that to get materials out to the barn also. And if you know me, I've become kind of a lawn nut. Yeah. So I'm trying not to drive on my lawn as much.
Couple more here. We got, do you need to treat veneer differently? Could you maybe talk a little more about this? Anything else to add to what we had already said?
No, as far as veneer, now you don't really need to treat it any differently. You just have to, you really just got to have a plan when you're working with veneer. Really think about what you're doing. But it's pretty basic the way I work with it. I use contact cement. I find that's just the easiest way. And once you come up with a plan, the one thing that some people will say that when they're using contact cement, they only use 20 mil. veneer.
Mm-hmm.
I've used both 10 and 20, and I've never had an issue. But it does seem to make sense to maybe use the thicker veneer. I don't know. Do you have any experience with that?
Most of the stuff that I've done with veneering is like just, I mean, I wouldn't even know it to be as far as the thickness. It's usually just like whatever I get at my supplier is a paperback veneer. I mean,
I like the paperback too.
Yeah. Have you gotten into Odie's oil in their line of projects? Have you ever used Odie's oil?
I haven't. And so like, that's like Odie's oil, Osmo, and there's another one, Rubio.
Yeah.
Right? So these are these finishes that I'm sure they're great finishes, but the downside is it's like a wax. So if you ever want to go over that, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of old school, and I'm kind of like just like an old dog now, where I know what I know, and I don't want to get into it. But maybe I will. I'm not ruling it out, but I'm just being honest.
Hey, it's good to be honest. We're gonna wrap things up here. I'm gonna just take one more question. So if we didn't get to your question, sorry about that. You'll have to join us on another live another time. But John, Doug Fir outdoor bench, Mission Rustic Epoxy, or SPAR?
So the question is, he's building an outdoor bench,
Mm-hmm.
a Mission Rustic style, and to finish it, epoxy or spar.
SPAR.
I think that, so there's the question, right? Like if you put that's a film finish. Is that how you would describe that?
I guess so.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a film over top of the wood.
Yeah.
So I'm just recently, like, maybe a year or two ago, I might say, just go with the spar.
Yeah.
And that's because I don't have the experience with epoxy over a piece of wood. But now I'm going to say, go with some kind of penetrating oil that you can just keep reapplying.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just feel like either one of those is going to fail, because as soon as some moisture gets in there, that's going to expand that wood, which is going to cause havoc in the rest of it, and just start that whole cycle of that finish breaking down. Then your only choice is to take it off or sand it. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, I know that Jesse, the Samurai Carpenter, built his deck furniture a few years ago, and he had problems with it. It's now under a covered area, which is great, but he had to refinish a bunch of it. Did he use a spar? Honestly, I cannot remember what he used. I feel like he used, I can't remember. I'll have to look back and see.
This. Like if you've ever gone to a park somewhere, and you'll see that they have benches that are made for those parks. Like even if you walk the High Line in New York City, you'll see benches that are made of some kind of a tropical wood, probably a teak or mahogany or sapele. None of them have a film finish on it, because that would just become a maintenance nightmare. So more than likely, they're going to just put an oil on there. I'm kind of thinking about treating outdoor furniture the same way you would treat a deck. Probably wouldn't put a film finish like a polyurethane or a spar varnish on a deck, because it's going to scratch and get slippery. So treat your furniture the same way you treat your deck. It's not going to have that brilliant look of a film finish, but at the same time, probably you'll be able to keep it looking nicer longer with just a coat of, and literally I put a coat of this stuff on the table that I just built for the outdoor kitchen, 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that is, we're pushing an hour that we've been sitting here chatting.
I had fun. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, that's great. So we're going to wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, John, for joining us and chatting. It's been awesome. We'll do this again sometime soon.
Super.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. We will see you guys another time. Have a great rest of your evening. Thanks, John.
Thanks.
See you guys later.